Welcome to the Zad Mahenda podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with Stefan Rust. Stefan is the founder and CEO of Laguna Labs, Truflation, Nuon Finance, Trusted Node, and many more successful businesses both inside the crypto space and out. Stefan is a serial founder and entrepreneur whose latest projects focus on bringing true and transparent economic data to the blockchain through Chainlink oracles. Transparency is paramount to a fair digital world, and transparency is a key principle of blockchain technology. This industry is evolving at a rapid pace, and I'm excited that I get to speak to the people building this new decentralized global financial system. Before we begin, allow me to say a few words about what this podcast is all about. To tell you about myself, I study economics and previously worked in the crypto industry for TradeBlock and CoinDesk indices. My goal is to focus on crypto, blockchain technology, economics, entrepreneurship, and geopolitics, many of which go hand in hand. Each guest I bring on gives a unique perspective from their personal experiences and knowledge in their respective fields of expertise. Hopefully, the sum of these perspectives, as well as your own research, can prove to be useful to all of my listeners. For me, the opportunity to talk to brilliant and remarkable people is a privilege that I am grateful for. There are a few moments in this podcast in which Stefan's audio glitches momentarily. I apologize for this inconvenience as I work to enhance the quality of each new episode. I will get better every time, that I am sure of. As always, this podcast is available on Spotify, YouTube, and Anchor. Use the timestamps as you please, and don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Now, without further ado, Stefan Rust. Stefan, welcome, and thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Thanks, Zad. Super good to be here, and yeah, excited. Always good to catch up, and yeah, look forward to this podcast.
It's really great to talk to you again,
Yeah,
and I'm really happy you're joining me today, and I look forward to our conversation about Truflation and all of your other companies that you're running currently. So, as the founder of Truflation, Nuon Finance, your businesses, and to some extent your life, revolves around clear and transparent economic data.
yeah,
Enabling accurate inflation data transmission to the blockchain is something new to many in crypto, but it's a necessary component of the decentralized financial system that you and many others are building. But this inflation data is not identical to figures released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Truflation claims to be decentralized, true inflation data, not the understated centralized government rates. So who better to talk about this than the founder himself? Before we get to Truflation and everything it has to offer, let's first identify the problem, the economic data problem, the problem that led to the inception of Truflation. Tell us a bit about who's controlling the narrative and what are they doing wrong?
So at a high level, what we found was, and it started really in 2021. I started looking into inflation and metric, and the reason why inflation mattered was it was the one metric that really summed up the performance of an economy. And that was what you would use to measure how an economy was growing. And it was good for an economy to grow at a steady 2 to 5, or in a China, 8%. But what people wanted was steady growth. And so that's what people sort of measured the performance associated with economic growth. And at the same time, if you actually look into it, the same people reporting the metric are the people managing the economy, are the people actually doing the weighting and the scoring of those metrics, and the people then reporting that. And so it just felt riddled with conflict of interest, and we felt we needed to take, it should be done by an independent party. It should be monitored in a more modern fashion. because subsequently we also realized that the model that they were using was over a century old. And so we felt like, come on, a century ago, I mean, not every household had electricity a century ago, right? 100 years ago, not every household had electricity. That was 1920. Sort of, we have mobile phones now, we have internet, we have computers, we have screens, etc. Right? And so all of those elements have evolved since. And rather than just tracking 60,000 items on a panel-based basis, how can we take a more census approach with a developer mindset on building a scalable, modern infrastructure and a transparent, independent calculation of what and how an economy is performing? And that resulted in really Truflation.com.
Yes, that's correct. Consumer price index data is gathered and disseminated by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. Federal Reserve claims to prefer core PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, as best measure inflation with 2% target. I think that's a target that they can never really hit, or is that just a hopeful claim?
Yeah, and then in energy, so utility bills, so you can't live without electricity because everything's coupled with electricity, right? And then the other element, food, is not included in the core CPI.
Right.
So those to me are the most important survival ingredients, right? And so yeah, to me it was just really okay. Yeah, I mean, anyway, it just seems like a creation by experts to report a number that is a lot easier to manage and direct, and where they have a lot more direct influence over food. How do you control the price of food? And you don't want to necessarily do that in a given market. And so I guess that's and then ultimately the utilities are partially government owned, but also are drawing down on the supply of electricity and oil, and the that industry is a very powerful and big economic driver with the petrodollar.
And I know we're going to focus mostly on the US, but maybe you can speak to how important this inflation data is for not just Americans, but people in the UK and other countries that have experienced even higher inflation. How important is this for the human suffering aspect of not being able to understand how much wealth you are losing every single year? And you spoke about oil and energy. This year especially has been a very difficult one for measuring the inflation rate of oil because of the lack of supply from the conflict in Russia. But maybe you can speak a little bit more, because Truflation also does feature UK economic data. Maybe you can speak to that a bit more, the conflict that they have.
So I mean, two things I'd bring up there. One, I mean, the UK and Europe specifically is very dependent on Russia for energy supply. And today, it's now heavily dependent on the US for gas supply, right? So they've replaced oil from Russia with gas from the US. And that number one. But number two is the UK utility bills have risen over about 80 to 90% over the last 12 months in anticipation of the winter, harder access to oil from Russia in order to convert that into energy. And so that's been a big impact over there. And what we try to do is just really calculate things on a day-to-day basis, right? So you can see things. You don't need to wait every single month until somebody gets onto a podium and then broadcast this huge number that really, just because they announce the number doesn't really impact you or me on a day-to-day basis, right? But if we can show it and portray it, how it's changing daily, that to us is a much better metric, but because it allows individuals to make decisions every single day as well. So ultimately, if you compound the decision-making capability from once a month to every single day, it has a far greater impact in the return of the decision that you make. And so, I mean, that's just sort of as we've extended into new markets. And we've always been exploring, do we go deeper, build scalable infrastructure, automate the process a lot more so we can go into markets faster? Or do we reach out into markets faster and then worry about the scalability afterwards, right? And, Truflation's a DAO. And so a lot of the token holders, we meet once a month, and a lot of things get put to vote. We're trying to automate that in the process as well, by the way. But the consensus at the DAO level was to continue building out a scalable infrastructure and going deeper into the data sets. And so that's what we started to do. We've since looked at exploring other markets. And of course, the first things you think of is, oh, which are the big markets to go after, right? Oh, Germany, Japan, right? Big economic producers, China, right? Sort of second in the world's GDP. So they'll go after those markets. And it was only when I sort of got off a call with a friend in Argentina, where they were extremely passionate about what we did, to the extent where they're begging us to go there, right? They'll help us. They'll find the sources of data for us. They'll help us get distribution. And partially the reason was they suffer 80% inflation on an annual basis. They have governments that don't even report inflation, right? So on a given month, oh, we don't know what the number is. We'll forget it. We won't report it this month. We'll report it next month. So you don't even get a reporting. So you have no idea how they're performing. And then lastly, which was the most shocking bit to me was, and I've never been, so I've never witnessed this, but you go to a supermarket for groceries in Buenos Aires, and at any day, not a specific day, but any day in the month, they will all of a sudden have raised the prices by 20% in one go.
Wow.
So you don't even know when they raise the prices.
That is purely unmanageable. That is unmanageable for households, especially for households of low income that are working on wage, hourly wages. That's the thing that I feel in America we don't think about the most. We complain about inflation all the time, and we should, right? But the data we have is actually second to none. The situation in Argentina, you're much more familiar with it than I am, but the whole point of trying to get this data accurately is so that you can beat this, so you can find ways to surpass this inflation rate and somehow beat it in the market, where in any way that you can. And for people that don't own assets, it's extremely difficult. So 80% inflation, and you don't even know if that's the correct number. How do you even cope with that? How do people find a way around that? It must be extremely difficult. The wealth gap must be exceedingly increasing every single year at a rapid rate, much faster than in the United States.
Yeah, and then particularly there's no ability to start saving, right? There's no ability to accumulate wealth because your whole driver is, oh, I've received my paycheck, go spend it. Because if I don't spend it today, tomorrow it may cost me 20% more expensive. And then I can't make rent, I can't pay rent at the end of the month, or I can't pay the school fee, or because food became so expensive. And food, by the way, in most countries, on average, is around 20% of the household income expenditure, right? Rent and is about the same magnitude. Actually, no, it's a bit less, about 15%. But still, it's quite a significant chunk of people's households expenditure. And so, and if food rises, so above a certain price threshold, that's when you get riots, because people can't eat. And if they can't eat, the survival nature, you waken the beast inside the humans, right? Because we need food to survive. And then that drive to survive just takes over and ultimately results in violence, in rebellion, in revolutions, right?
Yeah, and actually, one thing I'm curious about that I really don't know is what is the standard of the interest rates in Argentina? Because one might say, well, if the inflation's that high, then you can use debt to your advantage because you're paying it back at a much lower value than when you started. So
yeah, but interest rates are 100%. So you still are actually losing money, right? So if you'd borrow at 100%, and you are still losing 80% whilst you borrowed, and paying 100% and losing 80%. So it makes it harder to make up for that.
okay. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics had peak inflation in June 2022 at 9.1%.
Yeah.
Truflation had peak at March of near 12%. At that same time that you had 12% on Truflation, BLS was recording 8.5% March 2022. What's the reason for this discrepancy? How could you explain this best?
So, I mean, largely was the price of oil, right? I mean, that really was what drove up that price. This was when, oil supply was in dire need. The world was going through a big restructuring in terms of supply chain, and transportation costs as such grew significantly. And it was only after that when the decision to draw down and provide more supply of oil into the market using the SPR, or the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, and draw on those and provide that at supply to bring and reduce the cost of oil, did we see a dropping in that inflation, right? And you can see that if you go to app.truflation.com and you look at transportation, around the same time frame, inflation on oil and transport was 23%. And bear in mind that transportation in the US is about 20% of people's expenditure. That can be gas costs, that can be car repairs, that can be leasing contracts, as well as other public transportation that people might be using.
So we've also witnessed a US debt to GDP above 120% for 2020, 2021, 2022. We've seen the debt ceiling been raised since last October 2021 by $2.5 trillion, just a little bit more than a year ago, to a ceiling of 31.4 trillion, which we have now broken that ceiling as well. Do you have any comment on this? How do you think about these metrics, and do you think that the raising in the federal funds rate is really not sustainable because of this debt to GDP deficit, essentially?
So it is sustainable if we have economic growth. If you stifle growth, you don't generate the income anymore. And so how do we foster growth, right? And we need to foster growth in new emerging markets, because we're not going to foster a significant amount of growth to be able to pay off the debt that's been created and is continuing to be layered on to the existing debt, not only in the form of interest payments, but also in terms of drawdowns. And so how do we find that economic growth? And to me, the economic growth comes from entrepreneurs. And it's generally today, with all the bureaucracy, with all the stringent requirements and compliance, you need to be at least 2 entrepreneurs per startup, right? You need 1 founder, maybe 2, 3 co-founders, right? So you can't do it on your own anymore. And you need to focus on 4 different verticals, or 5 different verticals, right? I mean, electric cars, that's driving huge amounts of growth. Robotics, as a result out of it. If we're bringing manufacturing back home, then what does that mean? Whichever home nation that is, everybody's trying to have manufacturing back in their nation. They're trying to be sovereign on their own. So that means you need robotics, right? You need the right kind of machines. You need the right kind of software. You need the intelligence associated to build out those factories and that production capabilities. You have AI, right? Huge growth in terms of AI. DNA, genomics, right? Look at all the new genomic solutions that are coming out. That's going to bring down the costs of healthcare significantly, which will again further save on the debt ceiling and generate significant amounts of income that hopefully drives revenue for a government that allows them to then bring down that debt ceiling. And then lastly, of course, blockchain, right? I mean, you look at all of those innovations that are happening, those represent significant job creation opportunities. They create huge income opportunities, right? And new GDP growth. And if you, how do we, from an economic standpoint, incentivize those industries to drive hire new talent, to re-educate new talent, existing talent into those specific sectors, and then ultimately create new export capabilities that are leading edge and not trying to steal in and bring in and put up barriers for new leading edge technologies that can be built in other countries, because those jurisdictions are more favorable for supporting, and as a result, supporting innovations in those categories, and as a result, attracting the brains that have been educated somewhere else and then are leaving to go build the technologies elsewhere and create those jobs elsewhere and provide the tax income elsewhere. So it's at a cost to the economy in general, to the US economy in general. And I think that's sort of my view around the debt ceiling and how we tackle the debt. And I'm very positive that we can, if the entrepreneurs and the economy is let to do so, right? Lawsuits to Google, DOJ just did a lawsuit suing Google for, advertising infringement, right? And then I was just listening, and then if you study how they actually do the advertising with the innovation that they brought to that sector, how much has moved online, how that whole economy has driven significant efficiencies as a result to the DoubleClick acquisition and to the coupling in of search, the efficiencies that have been created, the jobs, the refunneling of funds back to the publishers of the websites. It has created a lot more opportunity, just not centrally. So you can't control it with one button in one entity. It's actually all distributed everywhere. And so I have to go and collect those, which makes it a bit more cumbersome to do that. But yeah, I think that to me is a bigger thing. And my fear is that if I look at debt worldwide, it's about 300 trillion, sorry. We need to service that debt. How do we service that debt? Let's say 50, and two things, right? So we have to service that debt at the moment. Roughly, I think the servicing cost of that debt is about 15 trillion. That, we need growth to support that. We can't just continue to print new money to pay off a debt. All we're doing is pushing it forward, and somebody else has to carry the weight. You look at the regulators and the people in power today, I'm not the youngest chicken anymore, but you look at, they're 80 years old, all of the people that are sitting, the elites that are making decisions for how an economy should run, the future generations, they're elites. They're 80 years old. And at 80, you don't have, you're brittle, you're scared, you're risk averse, right? You're worried about, I don't know, all these things that might possibly happen to you. Whereas if you're young at 20, I don't care. I'm going to be smoking. I'm going to be drinking. I'm going to be doing my kite surfing. I'm going to be doing my bungee jumping. I'm going to be working 24 hours behind a tree. I don't need sleep, right? I can live off, whatever, Red Bulls and work and coding all night long, right? So it's a very different age gap and very different cultural perceptions and risk appetites at that different age level. And so how can people at that 80-year-old age bracket feel how an economy is doing and what the prospects are for a 20-year-old or somebody who's just put out 200,000, taken on a loan of 200,000 to pay college education? What is the hope for me? Where do I go? I mean, forfeiting that debt is not the right way.
Yeah, that concept of student loan forgiveness that was brought up earlier in the year by Joe Biden didn't really seem like it made sense to me, at least. But you're speaking about something that I want to get to later in the podcast about how entrepreneurs really pioneer economic growth,
Yeah.
and how creating an environment that is beneficial and incentivizes entrepreneurs to want to come to the US, stay in the US, and have domestic growth is extremely important. And hopefully also we can touch on the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which was passed after the Enron case, which made it much more
Yeah,
difficult
no,
for small
no.
companies to go public. Um, but I want to stay zoomed out for a moment and get your macro outlook. What is Stefan Rust's macro outlook for 2023? How are you positioning yourself in this market environment? How can you describe the current state of the crypto market, since that's what you're in right now?
Yeah.
Maybe what's the sentiment amongst your peers? Are you optimistic or pessimistic on this near future? And how would you define that near future in terms of 1 to 3 to 5 years? That's a lot.
Loaded question, man. Wow.
Macro outlook.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think crypto's gone through about 400 days worth of a bear market, right? I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is the bear in crypto started a lot earlier. It started in November 2021, right? Really. So we went through the whole 2022 and we're still in the bear market. I personally believe in crypto, we're at the bottom. And I think we're going to be bumbling along the bottom, and we'll have days of spurts of leap jumps and growths as new innovations come out. And what you're seeing in the crypto landscape is, the true believers are still building and they're creating value. They're here to stay. They want to change the existing systems. They want more transparency in banking, and Bitcoin and blockchain offers that. They want more insights and more participation rights. Again, the blockchain allows for that, right? You can see the people that are holding wallets, people that are staking, they have a bigger voting right, right? So they can actually participate in the specific microeconomies as they relate to the specific ecosystems of each of the blockchains. So I think that's how I see the landscape at the moment. I think we've had a couple of pumps over the last sort of week or two, where we've gone from a 1,200 to a 1,600 from an Ethereum standpoint,
Yep.
or from Bitcoin's now at 23,000 from 17,000. So, significant jump ups. But I think those are just the beginning, and we'll see us have days or, over the course of the next 3 to 4 months that will happen like that. We are still dependent on the fiat economy, right? Crypto's tiny, right? And when Jamie Dimon in Davos says, "Oh, crypto," I mean, what are you talking about crypto? I mean, it's nothing. I don't
I think he
waste my
called
time.
it I think he called it pet rocks.
Pet rocks, yeah.
He referred to Bitcoins as pet rocks, something like that.
Yeah. Which, I mean, if I'm looking at the derivatives market and I see a quadrillion size industry versus this tiny little, DeFi industry that has
Less than
I
a
don't
trillion
know,
market cap, or
less
about
than a
1
trillion.
trillion.
I mean, the
Yeah.
whole market
The whole
cap of
market's
crypto is
about
a
1
trillion,
trillion.
right?
Yeah. And that we don't know if
It's
that's
like,
actually accurate, because the liquidity on anything below 500 ranking by market cap is extremely it's extremely illiquid.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not even relevant, right? I mean, it's no
Yes.
point.
Yes.
But I do think that, so as a result, because we're dependent on the fiat world, we will not, I don't think we will see a turnaround before the interest rates start flattening out and we don't see any more interest rate rises. And that, in my view, is going to be around the summer timeframe. I think crypto will recover faster than the fiat markets. We will exceed the recovery.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Why do you say that? And just to comment on your point for those that are listening, federal funds rate was raised from this past December of 2022 from 3.8% to 4.33% currently. But why do you think
50 basis
crypto would
points.
recover faster? Because on the last episode, Omar was commenting on how the crypto market is obviously one of the highest risk asset classes there is, and so he said it's the last money in and the first money out. So that's interesting that you think that it will recover faster than maybe equities. Why do you say that?
Because I think the money is no longer coming from external in, it's growing internally, and it's being
Interesting.
fed
Okay.
internally. What happened during low interest environments and during the whole 2021, 2022 was interest rates were so cheap, money was being, an interest income on earnings for stable coins in crypto land was like 19%. People were promising 19% returns on your stable coin. So I can borrow at 0%, dump that into the crypto land, borrow and stake it there and earn 19%. And then when
Yeah.
I need a payback every time, I just take it out and I get 19% on top of it. So it's a
Yeah.
no-brainer. It's been no-brainer industry sucking out. And then that led to over-collateralization. Under-collateralization, sorry, where I'm borrowing, I'm lending out more than I have in the anticipation that I'll get that 19% tomorrow. And so they just overextended themselves every single time to the extent that it overextended themselves to the overextender, to the people that was going to pay me, who was also overextended. So you had the whole domino that then now referred to as the contagion. And so that external money is out. That is out of the system. You got Jamie Dimon looks at this as pet rocks, right? So JP Morgan doesn't want to come into this. Fidelity says it's coming in, but they're all going into Bitcoin. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because they view that as the gold of, the digital gold. And so as a result, it's just store of value. There's no utility to it. And so the utility is really being developed and built out internally. Look at the developer community in Ethereum, the layer twos. Look at the liquidity on those two platforms. Look at the transaction volume across those platforms. Look at Solana. Look at the developer engagement, the utility associated with that, right? And that is creating velocity. The more transactions I have within an ecosystem, the more velocity of money I have. Velocity of money drives growth. I have to sell it. I have to make more before I can sell it, right? I have to, so that cycle, so I've sold it. Oh shit, I have to go make some more. I have to sell it, so you have that sorry, I hope that language okay. But you have that
That's all
back
right.
and forth around that, right? And I think Bitcoin, if you look at the original white paper, it was set out to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And so as such, and the reason I got into Bitcoin was because it was for remittances and for payments.
Mm.
It was super fast, really cheap. And, I could do it direct around the world. No
Yes.
15 middlemen, waiting for opening hours, closing hours, oh man, and different intermediaries with different banks, different outlets, and on a centralized chain that, ultimately should have been the internet, but somehow it was some big old ass, sort of infrastructure that was had unique formats, and again was mostly built in 1950 or something, right? And so that to me is what's sold. And I think what you're seeing now is these ecosystems are beginning to build that velocity internally, right? Ethereum has become the de facto currency for all of the utility on the Ethereum chain, on the layer twos, etc. The Atom has become the utility for the Cosmos ecosystem, the Polkadot for the DOT system, and then the Solana for the Solana ecosystem. Avalanche is trying to do that same, right? Etc. And so Cardano, the same, right? So everybody's really trying to build out their own ecosystems, and as a result, building out their own currency that utilizes that infrastructure. But you can still only use it in the digital economy, right? It's still not transferable into the fiat world.
Right. And that actually speaks to what we were talking about earlier with Argentina and some of these other countries. Lebanon's another example, is the ability for people to export value out of their country or out of their own currency is extremely important. And also for people in the US that need to send money abroad, sometimes there is no way to do it. And Bitcoin provides a solution that I think will never go away. So when we're in these bear markets and people are extremely pessimistic and say things like, "Oh, well, crypto's dead," FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, they killed crypto. It's all a scam. And to be fair, we spend so much time saying crypto's not a scam, crypto's not a scam, and then the most famous man in crypto turns out to be a scam. We look pretty dumb. We look kind of silly, but the technology provides this remittance payments possibility that has never been possible before. And dApps and DeFi are just the beginning. And I think one of the interesting things is to see how the regulation will come in, because I was listening to an economist on the Bankless podcast recently where he said,
Yeah.
actually, maybe we should hold off on regulating DeFi because we don't want to over regulate. We don't want to overstep. But at the same time, entrepreneurs such as yourself, regulatory clarity is good for business, right?
Definitely.
So, is there anything missing, or maybe what are the first things that you would like to see from a regulatory standpoint that would make your life easier, make your businesses more legit, which they are, but what's missing there from your end?
Um, in my view, there's nothing missing. Um, Industries are highly regulated. The financial industry is highly regulated. And if I am taking custody of other people's money, I need to be regulated. And the laws are there for me if I am going to take custody of other people's money. The regulation is very clear, and why I don't think anything needs to be changed there. What we're trying to do in crypto is create more transparency. And all of a sudden, I never, by the way, never take custody of other people's money. In a way, everybody in crypto, and particularly in DeFi, that is holding and retaining self-custody of their funds is a mini banker by default. So we're all managing treasury. And we do that even individually when we're doing our savings and our calculations, except we've trusted somebody else to hold the money. In crypto, I'm holding the money, I'm doing my treasury, and as a result, I'm a mini banker because I will decide, do I lend you or not? Do I have the money to lend you? And I don't lend you directly. I lend it through a blockchain that says, oh, you can put it into this smart contract, which goes into like an escrow account. And that escrow account says, okay, because I have 100 in there, you can lend them 50 off the back of your 100. So ultimately, without anybody touching anybody else's money, other than me agreeing to a contract and terms associated with that contract, you can only withdraw it within 20, you have to give me 21 days notice. Then you can pull it out of the system, or you can withdraw it immediately, right? All those terms are stipulated in the smart contracts. And I decide as a banker how best to use the money in and the money out. Every bank makes its money not by investing. They say they have depositors and they lend out to other people with the depositors' money. And what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of these banks and institutions are all running on fractional reserves, right? So they don't, if I give you 10, they can lend out 88 of that 10. So they only have to retain 2. And so if I want to get my 10 back now, which in theory I should be able to, they can only give me back 2 if I was the only customer there. But because you are the customer there and 50 other people are the customer there, it adds up to being enough money there that they could pay me out that whole amount. And so my view is we're really creating a new system where there's no ownership of the tokens, or there's no transfer of ownership in or possession of the currencies that are in circulation. And number 2, all of it's very transparent. In terms of a block explorer, you can go view every single smart contract. You can look at the TVL in there, and then you can see all of the activity, the ins and outs, where those money's going. Are my funds still there? And you can check all of that, and you can see every single transaction as well. So why does that need to be regulated? If it's so transparent, how is regulation going to help that? Wouldn't it be smarter to invest from a regulatory standpoint, invest in watching, is your smart contract acting as you said it should be? Oh, people are breaking into that smart contract to try and hack it. How do I pursue those hackers? Right?
So that would be code audits, government code audits, which at the current state, it's usually done by third parties as
Yeah.
sort of a verification, which I think is a great thing for the industry as a whole, because it's almost like a stamp of approval that, okay, your smart contracts are doing what they say they should do. And decentralized self-custody is basically what this all started from. That's the point of crypto. FTX has proved that. A
Yeah.
lot of the bridge hacks have proved
Celsius,
that.
BlockFi, Free
Yes.
Arrows, all
And
of those
and
guys,
even
Genesis. I mean, they were all managing other people's money,
yeah,
and they were all regulated, and all the individuals working there were licensed individuals, right? They were
yeah.
financially licensed individuals. They had, I don't know, license level 2, or I don't know what the terminology is, depending on which jurisdiction. They were all licensed in those specific jurisdictions.
I think there's a massive education gap in people that had, for example, a Celsius wallet and thinking that they had custody when in fact they
Yeah.
do not. Not your keys, not your coins. We'll say it over and over. People will still
Over and
not
over
listen.
again.
Um, but
I
even
mean, the other
also,
thing, just coming back to your audits, I
yeah,
want to hone in on that, because that's another
please.
important point of education, right? If we look at audits today, you have Price Waterhouse, you had Arthur Andersen, you talked about Enron. Arthur Andersen was the auditor of, so they were an independent auditor that the governments trusted, the taxman trusted, with this new model of how to audit fiat businesses under the existing regulatory framework. Now, the crypto land, we found new types of auditors because we had a set of requirements that could not be appeased by these Price Waterhouses and KPMGs of the world. So we went to Trail of Bits, we went to Coin Fabric, we go to Certic, we go to all these other vendors that are now the Price Waterhouse equivalents in our industry, helping us do our audits on the smart contract, identifying loopholes, providing a third eye on the contracts that we're writing. And the review is not on the accounting processes and procedures and the fact that we can own more money than we can lend out more money than we actually have, and how that is under a regulatory compliance umbrella, okay, or in a legal framework, lawyered up. No, they're checking that you don't have too much power, that what is the individual managing the keys associated with that smart contract. Is there potential for a rug pull? Is there potential for a hack? And so that's where the audits move, and we've had to identify new sources for doing the audits as independents in the industry that have also built up significant credibility. Coin Fabric, Trail of Bits, they're top tier auditors in the industry, and everybody in the industry knows those names.
You are perfectly highlighting the entire theme of this discussion, which is transparency and how important it is. And one thing I would actually add that I think is important and is currently not very clear for many cryptocurrencies, not specifically dApps, but currencies, is the circulating supply and total supply. I think that should also be audited, and that should also be public information, because that's how a lot of these rug pulls happen. That's how FTX was able to use all this FTT as collateral, which is should never have even been an idea to begin with. But I totally agree. So do you think we're set to see a lot of growth from these auditing firms, that as like a sector of the crypto industry is going to be growing?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I'll let the auditing firms speak for themselves. They may go out and buy a Trail of Bits. They may go out and buy, a Coin Fabric or a Certic or a, Zeppelin. But that's up to them to do that, and I don't want to speak to them for that.
Hopefully we
just
can
think,
have someone from Certic or one of those on the podcast and ask them. Yeah.
But they don't need to be acquired because they're making so much money. I mean, they're really expensive to work with. I mean, they're sort of the lawyers in, they're what, if you go into any city around the world, every major city, in the center of the city, downtown, it's the lawyers, the accountants, and the bankers. They're the ones. Every industry, business, they're sort of in the suburbs, right? They've had to scale out, move out to second tier cities or third tier cities, right? Where they can afford the rent because they need more space. I've got a factory. I'm not going to build a factory in downtown New York, right? But in the end, a bank is a factory. It's just vertical in a high-rise building, and they can afford that rent in the high-rise building where they take 27 stories in, in the Rockefeller Center or wherever it might be. And so in crypto land, what has happened is those new lawyers, accountants, those are really the Trail of Bits and the Halborns and the Coin Fabrics and the Certics of the world. I mean, they are the source of, to a certain extent, they are the source of protection. They are, or the police, you could look at it, the precogs. Maybe that's a way to call it. They precog any hacks, right? And you're seeing that being automated more and more, right? So there are new companies like Hypernative coming up, and there's what was the other one? There are a number of new companies coming up that are trying to preempt based on significant patterns. They are being able to identify some new types of security solutions that are cropping up in the crypto marketplace. So, because it's so important. If you have 100 million,
yes,
a billion in TVL, how do you protect that? How do you make sure it stays friendly?
Yeah, and I think also some people don't realize there are even aspects of DeFi where you can still be hurt by centralized custody. For example, the bridge hacks. So you have a centralized custodian that allows for bridging of assets from one chain to another, but those keys are ultimately still held by one individual person or one group of people. And so you have these massive, $300-500 million exploits because, again, people are not doing self-custody. Yeah. So to get back to the point of transparency and decentralization, how is Truflation decentralized? How important is transparency to Truflation? And what do you do to ensure this transparency for all the users that would be plugging into those Chainlink oracles over the next few years?
So as I mentioned right at the beginning, right, when we looked at Truflation or inflation, we found it very difficult to decipher the breakdown for how they were calculating inflation, right, or the performance of an economy. At the same time, we were witnessing how people were feeling the loss in purchasing power, right? They were really feeling it. Not people, businesses around the world were saying, you're reporting this much inflation, but it's actually, but when I go to the grocery store, when I go to the gas tank, this is what I'm paying. It's like, that does not compute in my mind, right? How do you calculate that? And unless you're an economist or an expert or an analyst, right, that's reading these data and trawling through hundreds and hundreds of documents, it was very intransparent in terms of how they would do the weighting. And so we tried to build a dashboard where you could see what the weighting was. You could agree with it or not agree with it. But then ultimately, you could adjust in terms of how that percentage is based on your own expenditure to then be able to do the calculations as well. And so that's sort of what we tried to do. We launched that first dashboard. We have a new dashboard coming out on Monday.
Nice.
Which will still have the same set of data, but a much more front-end user experience that is further improved. And you will be able to go another layer deeper. So every time we're trying to offer the data sets that we offer at another layer deeper. So today we have 12 sub-indexes to the overarching inflation index.
Right.
And now in each of the sub-indexes, you will have 3 or 4 sub-indexes to those sub-indexes, so sub-sub-indexes. And then you'll see the weighting associated with those. So in real estate, you'll have 4 other components. In transportation, you have 2 or 4 other components. What's the weighting of those? Who are the suppliers of those data, right? And then you can see the breakdown in how that is weighted, right? So if you go to transportation, you see today, maybe 19.8% is the average household spends 19.8% on transportation. That's vehicle purchases, that's vehicle expenses, gas, oil, fuel, etc., and then public and other transportation. So if that's the case, what does the vehicle purchase information look like? How has that gone up or down? And so in the next version, you will then see improvements around that. To provide further transparency and education, because if people are beginning to feel it, they want to understand it better. Because I'm feeling it, I don't understand it. Help me understand it. And that's what we're trying to do, help you understand it by tracking a lot of data. So we track 18 million items. We have multiple sources for each one of those items that we track on a daily basis. And your inflation is going to be different to my inflation, is going to be different to somebody in the oil industry, to a coffee barista, to a microbrewery around the corner, right? And so how do we now enable users to upload their expenses, to integrate their credit card data into, or copy, take their Expensify activity or their zero accounting solutions and plug that into a personalized calculator. So Zad's inflation is going to be 7% over the last year. Stefan's, because he's on planes all the time and traveling, he's going to be up at 20% inflation. But then the brewery and the microbrewery next door, because the price of wheat and the price of food has come down, raw material, he's going to be living at a 2% inflation, excuse me. And so that's another angle that we want to provide in terms of education and transparency. But all of that transparency has nothing to do with the blockchain at the moment, right? So that's all just visualization and market education. At the moment, we do, and it's a journey, right? Decentralizing for us has been a journey, right? We've tried to get to market first, monopolize the market, and work in parallel on the decentralization of the data. Where we decentralize today is every day we write the data to the blockchain, and we write it to 6 different blockchains. In partnership with Chainlink, we make this data available to anybody subscribing to that data on those chains. We are in parallel decentralizing our database. So we're moving the whole database and the compute algorithms onto the blockchain so that then node operators will do the compute for us and will verify that the data has been approved. This is authentic data. And then the algorithms will then calculate based on that data. As we then add and extend and enable more and more data to be included into each of the sub-indexes and the sub-sub-indexes, how do we ensure quality control? And so we've built in the software a verification outlier anomaly protection, right? So if everybody's saying it's $1, $1.10, $1.09, $1.08, and then somebody comes in with $5, wow, that's an outlier. Let's verify that or not include that in the calculation, depending on the time sensitivity and depending on the other sort of factors that come in as it relates to that sub index.
But can you say again how many data sets you're tracking?
18 million.
18 million. For anyone listening, I'm going to be linking the Truflation dashboard in the link in the description. Please check it out. We have your year-over-year Truflation rate US at 5.4% right now, and for UK it's at 19.8%. So the collection of the raw data is done by your team, and essentially that raw data will then be compiled and hopefully automated so that the computation of the actual inflation rate and then the sub-index percentages will all be done by the node operators.
Yeah.
So how could you describe to someone who maybe doesn't really understand this, how does the business model of Truflation work? Because 18 million data sets, that's a lot of data. How does the revenue support the continuation of this and the maintenance of this data collection?
So we have 3 customer segments. We have a retail dashboard. So you can go to app.truflation.com. Today it's free. We focused on growth and users. We now have 50,000 unique visitors coming to app.truflation.com just to find out more about inflation. And I'd say A lot of people come back maybe once a week, once just to check how much is inflation now. Let's have a look. And it's a hot topic at the moment. So we're running on the wave of inflation. And then every month around the 13th, it becomes a really hot date. So we get a lot of traffic from that. How do we allow people on a freemium basis to be able to access this data, learn, and then if they want to download the data, if they want to be able to store certain indexes in a graph, or get alerts on their phone, that you then have to pay a small premium, right? Just a tiny amount that it's negligible, right? It's like the equivalent of 2 Starbucks coffees or something like that. That's sort of what we've been thinking, and that's the model that you'll see us rolling out this quarter. But it's still going to be free for everybody. And if you want more capabilities, then you've got to go deeper. At the same time, if you're building dApps or you're building a Web2 app and you want a stream, how do you integrate that stream? How do you work with that? How do you build on that? And so you pay a fee for the data feed that you're getting. You can pay it on a monthly basis. You can pay it on a per call basis. So we have a number of different models out there for that. And then lastly, we have another segment that was a bit to my surprise at the beginning, but everybody told me, oh, that's obvious. That's obvious. It's like, it wasn't to me at the time. But it was really the traditional finance world. It was, private equity funds, hedge funds that were really interested in the data, because we have across those 18 million items, we have some 10 years of historical data associated with each one of those. That allows a lot of these hedge funds and private equity funds to better predict the performance of centralized economic indicators and be able to place bets according to that prediction and then the resulting outcome. And so those are the sort of 3 segments. Each one, basically, it's a simple model. If you look at it in simple terms, it's just you buy the data, which you pay for. We pay the contributors of data, right? And we keep a little margin in the middle to subsidize the development, the enhancements, and the features. There are other functionalities in there. We're launching a studio where developers, curators, and analysts can build unique indexes. They can load those indexes into a marketplace. So we've created marketplace.truflation.com. You can find any of the indicators, not only the Truflation indicators that own 18 million, but now all of the leading indicators that influence the 18 million items in the inflation index. So you can get weather data, you can get shipping data, you can get raw material data, you can get precious metals, commodities data, wage inflation information, etc. Those are leading indicators to inflation, and those are coming more and more to the marketplace itself.
So that's really interesting that you mentioned private equity and hedge funds that are interested in this, and I can see why. So, but for any developers that may be listening to this, there's a developer center on Truflation that has a GitHub quick start and a Discord quick start. Maybe you can speak just a bit to how you're helping people onboard to your systems.
Simplicity, transparency. Our code is on GitHub. You can review our code at any point in time. It's open sourced. So we are trying to be as transparent as we can whilst not yet fully decentralized. Number one. Number 2 is simplicity. How do we make it as easy as possible for Web 2 and Web 3 developers to integrate our data into their application, into their prediction market, to build out derivatives, perpetuals, synthetic assets associated with the raw data that we're providing, build out commodity-backed stablecoins, asset-backed stablecoins, flat coins. How do they source and simplify the integration of the inflation index or economic and financial data into their service and their application, and provide that onwards to their communities?
That is a perfect segue to Nuon Finance.
Yeah.
So Nuon is the first FLATcoin. So what exactly is a flat coin?
So, I mean, in essence, think of it as a synthetic asset pegged to the cost of living. So you calculate the cost of living and you peg an asset to that cost of living. So if the cost of living goes up, the asset is pegged to that cost price change, right? Or other people would call it a stable coin pegged to inflation. Or an inflation protected stable coin. And yeah, that's basically what Nuon is. If you are in the UK suffering 20% purchasing power loss, how can you hedge yourself against that? Maybe if you're an individual and living day to day, you can't afford to. However, if you're a small medium business that has a bit of a treasury and you're holding on to 6 months worth of cash, how could you put that cash to work and or make sure that you're holding the value of that cash yet not losing in purchasing power for that cash? And so that's sort of how we've built this out. And Argentina, coming back to that same example, right? I mean, if I'm losing 80% a year, that means basically it's worth 50. I can only buy half a cup of coffee at the end of the year from the full cup of coffee that I could get at the beginning of the year. So how do I make sure that I can have the same dollar and retain that full cup of coffee at the end of the year?
So maybe we can get a little bit technical here about the collateral, the mint burn process, because it's different than what else has been out in the market. People may conflate it with other algorithmic stable coins and things like that. So maybe it's important that we just make distinctions here. So collateral can be posted to mint Nuon FLATcoins, correct?
Yep.
And the collateral options are BTC, ETH, USDC, USDT, and AVAX. Interesting that you threw AVAX in there. What was the reason for throwing in AVAX, if I may ask?
So since we've also added link, so link tokens,
Okay, I didn't see
as
that.
well as I think no, I mean we've just updated and we're in the middle of launching, so that goes live next week. So we'll be launching next week with Nuon live. We're waiting for the audits to come back.
There you go.
As we were talking about, there you go, right? Yeah, but in essence, the reason why we needed two things or that were really important. One is liquidity, right? So if in order to hold the peg, and by the way, Nuon is over collateralized. So there is more collateral in terms of value of collateral in the collateral hub versus Nuons that have been minted in circulation. It always will be greater. But and at the point in time where Nuon grows too much in value in terms of circulation or in price, and you don't have enough collateral, we need to be able to offload the collateral really quickly. And so we need to ensure that there's enough liquidity to be able to do so. And so in the top 100, there is usually enough liquidity there for us to offload that. And so we just started with those sets of coins. I mean, we will add, we've been talking to Frax, right? A great stable coin. So they've got their FPI index. How can we have that as collateral, right? We want to talk to more and more providers in the top 100 where there is liquidity available, and people that want to have the the flat coin, they can do so by adding that collateral in there. And each coin at the moment in version 1 has its own collateralization ratio.
Interesting.
Which means that each coin, depending on the beta, which measures the volatility of a specific coin in the collateral, will have a certain ratio. And in the case of Avalanche or Link, it might be at 130%, whereas a USDC, it'll be 101%. Because USDC is pretty flat, it's pretty stable. USDT, same thing. They're pretty stable. They've held their peg a long time. So there's less volatility there. A Bitcoin being a bit more stable, having a lot more volume and liquidity associated with that might be 120. So we'll be providing transparency again associated with that and be sharing that. Version 2, it doesn't really matter because we'll be providing you a blend of all the collateral that you have in there, and that will then calculate what that is.
Okay, so V1 collateralization ratio depends on the type of collateral. V2 basket of collaterals that are all moving, I guess, in tandem. And then additionally, linked to the Truflation oracle.
Yes.
To determine the rate at which collateral is offloaded in the chance of a valuation change.
Okay. So the Truflation is really, it tells us how the peg needs to be and what the value is of the Nuon in circulation in comparison to Bitcoin, ETH, or even maybe US dollar.
So playing devil's advocate, someone says, okay, how is this different from Terra? How is this different from UST? How is this different from DAI? What's your response to that?
Well, the DAI, UST, Tether, so that, well, let me break that down into two different categories. One is the Tether, the USDC, Circle, Bitfinex, which manages USDT, and BUSD, which is managed by Paxful. You look at those are centralized cryptocurrencies. DAI, Frax, those are all decentralized entities. However, all of them and 99% of all stablecoins are pegged to the US dollar, which still means that the US government that has been printing in the last 10 years, 8x the value of all new money into the market for the last 100 years prior to 2010, you're still beholden as a stablecoin to that policy-making principle. And so we wanted to sort of extract ourselves from that policy-making principle and just look at the cost of living and come back to money was made to facilitate and simplify trade, the exchange of goods and services for a value. And that value was represented in a unit. And that's what we want to get back to. And that unit should represent the cost of a basket of items. And that's really what we wanted to do versus it either being backed by gold, which we could go back to, but that would be going back in time. And I think we can have a slightly more modern ways in doing that.
I think it's interesting too that you didn't decide to make your own coin as collateral. Because you very well could have, just like Luna did, and you could have controlled the supply, and the mint and burn would all be reliant on whatever that native coin is that you create. But your choice in these completely unrelated to Nuon collaterals like BTC, ETH, USDC is that you do not control that supply, and that supply is pretty steady, or at least predictable. So that basically prevents bank runs, right?
And there are two terms that with FTX, with their FTT token, Luna with their Terra with their Luna token, that came up and that are really important to understand. One is sort of, we call it the endogenous strategy, right? Where I have my own coin and my own coin is the collateral. And if my own coin blows up, my whole collateral strategy blows up. And as a result, my whole economy's and it's all internal dependent, right? So I can influence, like we saw with FTX, the price of FTT, and then I have more collateral and I can borrow a lot more against that, right? And so we're going down the route of indigenous, where we're having external parties provide us the collateral, right? Indigenous and then endogenous and then I didn't come up with these words, by the way. Those are lawyer words.
Actually, we use them in economics.
Sorry,
endogenous and exogenous variables.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. Or mathematical. So exogenous variables. That's what we're going to have, and I think that just gives a layer of security, a layer of trust, because in the end, every currency Why do people like the US dollar? Because we trust it. We know the US government's going to back it, and it's backed by, some people would say by the US Army, right? Some people would say by the US government's ability to always work and service the debt that it has outstanding, etc. Right? And so, depending on your belief, but people trust it to the extent that 80% of worldwide trade is done in US dollar. And so, we believe that velocity and turnover and trust are important elements to turnover is a big part in creating the trust. And then building trust is really important. Hence the audits. How do we share the audits that we do? Every single revision to the code goes through an auditor before it actually gets pulled into the new version, right? Things like that. So what are the processes to ensure security, and ensure accuracy of what we're doing and stability?
Yes. Anyone that's listening that's interested by what we've just said about Nuon Finance, also be leaving a link to that. Please check it out, read the docs, and understand exactly how this works, and try not to conflate it with some of these other stable coins, because it is fundamentally different. So now let's talk about you a little bit. How long? Actually, you know what? I should start with this. How many businesses have you started?
So I don't even know anymore, but I think I've been involved in about 7 or 8 different startups that I've launched. Largely in the mobile era. I then, I was very lucky at a very young age to work for a very big company that allowed me an opportunity to work in a rapidly emerging market. And I saw so many opportunities there, and you would meet really interesting, yet sometimes very obscure people. But the interesting people were all really driven to try and commercialize some of the rapidly evolving opportunities in a market that was growing at breakneck speed. And that was my first sort of real a mobile network when mobile was just growing up in China, growing in cities that were growing at 30-40% a year. And this is fiat world, cities, right? Not crypto world cities, but fiat world cities. And having gone through that, just represented huge opportunity. And that was my first sort of big startup. But actually before that, while I was at school, at college and university, I would remember my parents were living in Asia. So I would go to Asia, I would buy suitcases full of cheap t-shirts, and I would then sell them at a premium in Switzerland that people wanted. And that would pay for, some holidays that I could go and do. And or even, I started, anyway. So different things that I could do.
So there's an entrepreneurial spirit in you from a very young age.
Yeah.
Was there anyone that influenced you to be like that? Was it just something that came from within yourself?
No, I think it just, I don't remember anybody that really influenced me on that. I think I just remember growing up and on the radio, listening to the radio, and I would always hear, they would read out the Dow Jones, stock market every single day, right? And it was like, and there was just one guy, it was I can't remember the name. It was like a special shows. And on the radio, he was reading, this, Coca-Cola, closing 24/7, up $2.22, bang. And then this Colgate, da-da-da, right? So it was like the whole hour was just this. And it's like, how can people do a show like this? I mean, who listens to this crap? And then I realized when I sort of correlated that people were still reading newspapers, and my dad would read newspaper all the time. I then could then see, oh man, look, I put things together. I was always really curious, how do things work? And I still do. It's like, how does that work? Why? I mean, from a geek perspective, at the train stations, how do the lights work? When does the train know to go and not to go, right? Who's telling them, right? It's like, all of those things that I always wanted to understand. But coming back to, I then opened the newspaper, saw that actually the guy was reading the prices of stocks and the prices going up and going down and what the actual volume was. So he was reading all of these metrics there. And to me, that was fascinating, so much so that then I put a sheet together. If I had $10,000, where would I put, or it was $1,000 at the time, how much Coca-Cola would I buy? How much would I of this would I buy? How much of that? Why would I buy that? And that's where I got really excited. I bought Colgate. Why? Because everybody brushes their teeth and everybody uses Colgate. Simple, no brainer. Buy Colgate. Coca-Cola. Coke is it. Everybody's drinking Coca-Cola. I'll buy Coca-Cola, right? So it's like, it was really simple, but at 12 or 13, or I think it was 11, 12 years old, that's sort of how I was thinking. And yeah, that's how I got into, I guess, sort of just trying to figure out things work, making my own opinions, and not always, trying to follow the straight line that some teacher in a school thinks is the line that everybody should follow, and we should all be the same.
Do you think entrepreneurs are visionaries? You said you carve your own path.
Not necessarily. I think entrepreneurs can be very stubborn individuals. Entrepreneurs are persistent, right? They're tenacious. They hunt the yes. They don't wait till they get consensus. They just hunt. All we need is one yes. And then we're to the races. I've sold it. Yes, the customer said yes, he wants to buy it. But 1,000 said no beforehand. But I was tenacious enough to continue. I was persistent enough to stay at it and continue to believe. I mean, belief is a real important element within entrepreneurs, I would say.
What do you think is an ideal environment for an entrepreneur?
Oh. Hardship. Yeah, good question. I mean, I don't really have an answer, but humans, and I think entrepreneurs especially, push themselves into hardship because when under duress, we are extremely creative. We find solutions that we didn't think we could find. And that's why I think most entrepreneurs, you'll meet most on, we go through intermittent fasting, or we do 3-day fasts, or, we're hyper athletes at the same time. We wake up at 5 a.m. to crank out our emails, to work 24 hours, I don't know, 6 hours more a day than anybody else, right? And just to push ourselves to boundaries where we as a result are forced to become creative, because we're in a corner and we have no way out, and we have to find a way out. We have to.
There's something also to say about some people might not understand, well, why don't you have work-life balance? Where's your work-life balance? Isn't that important to you? And especially in your early years as an entrepreneur, how much did work consume you? Like, how much did that consume your life? Did people look at you and say, like, Stefan, you're working too hard, like, relax,
Yeah, definitely.
They don't understand it, right? The
And
goal
VCs were telling me that too. Oh, you work so hard. Why you work so hard? It's like, dude, it's like, this is, anyway, sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, work-life balance, for me, it is a work-life balance, right? I mean, I still work really hard, right? I mean, and if you want to be successful, you have to work hard. I just don't believe nothing grows on trees anymore, right? I mean, look at all the motivational videos out there. It's like, I wake up, even Kobe Bryant, to be a basketball star, he got up at 4 a.m. to go work out before breakfast, then went to work out with his teammates. Then after lunch, then he worked out again with his teammates. Then his teammates went to the bar. He went to work out again.
Saturday nights, back in the gym when everyone's out having a good time and he's working.
Look at Michael Phelps. He spent every single day until 30, whatever, until his last Olympics, in a swimming pool. Christmas, come hell or shine water, earthquakes, I'm still in a pool swimming, right? No matter what. And so those are just the athletes, right? I mean, look at the piano players, look at Jojo Ma. I mean, the Yo-Yo Ma. Look at how he's had to practice, right? I mean, 10,000 hours for a reason. And anyway, and I think the same as an investor. The same, you have to put in the hours. How many business plans have you met? How many startups have you met? How many have you engaged with? How many LPs have you met so that you can be that GP, right? So you have that full rounded sequence. And if you are an entrepreneur, it is a part of your work-life balance. Why? Because you're always learning. The hunger to learn. I love learning. And I find myself learning every single day something new. And when I don't learn, I'm bored. And I am not a nice person if I'm bored. You become agitated, you're frustrated, and then you become aggressive. You become, you neglect certain things, your family, your loved ones, your whatever it might be, right? Your society, the community you live in, your household. You tend to neglect all of that if you're not happy and energized, right? The most people that I know that are working hard are also playing hard, right? So you do both sides. So you find that balance.
One of the difficult things, especially for young people like myself, is like not knowing where to start and also being so scared of the risks, so scared of failure too.
Yeah.
Have you failed throughout these years? And
Oh,
how many
yeah.
times have you failed? How do you bounce back from those failures? Because when you're working so much and you're putting so much into it, the weight of failure seems to be even greater than you could imagine.
But when we learn to walk as babies, we fall over, we hurt ourselves, we cry, we bang our heads, but we get up again and we walk better and we won't do the same mistake twice. At least that's what we hope. And a lot of people, all of a sudden, we today are standing, walking, running. We can do all of those because we fell down, we hurt ourselves, we cut ourselves as a child because of that. We forgot to tie our shoelaces, we tripped over. And then so all of those elements have allowed us to learn how to be better at a skill set that we need to survive, e.g. walking, right? E.g. running, and so I think in the startup world or in the commercial and business world, it's the same. As long as we don't break our health, yeah. I don't think it's not that bad to fail. Obviously, it's not fun either, right? I mean, it's definitely not fun. It's super stressful. It's sleepless nights. And that is not the actual failure itself. That is the process of failing. That is worse than the actual failure. If you fail, at least you failed. You tried. You gave it your all, and you failed. Okay, it's like not everybody gets to go to the Olympics, right? But you try to qualify to get to the Olympics. And then if you're at the Olympics, you didn't win the gold medal, okay, but you were at the Olympics, you still achieved something, right? And you managed to get to the qualification rounds for the Olympics, right? So there's always a layer down. I did do a startup, but I failed. Oh, you did a startup? Oh, wow, what did you do, right? And so you automatically have a conversation point. And I think when you're young, what do you have to lose? The worst thing is you get up again and you go find a job and you work at a big company like you would normally otherwise, right? And you may do so 2 years later, but the experience you gained, that pressure, the learnings, the insights, the people will be bar none. And you won't forget that time.
We're gonna wrap up
I mean,
here.
I've gone through failure, and I'd never like talking about failure, and people don't want to hear failure, especially if they're going to back you, right? But it's an honest. I don't know. I've always been honest. Like, look, I failed in a couple of businesses. I was down. I made my first startup was very successful, and so I was very spoiled, right? I was lucky right from the word one, go, bang, oh, beautiful, right? I mean, working hard. It was super hard. But then, I think my third startup, I remember I was, or my fourth, I can't remember. I was down. I couldn't pay
Too many
rent.
to count.
I was, yeah, I had no, my credit cards were all maxed out. I had no money. I had to pay a bill at the end of the month. I was hoping before the week, that I just got a customer. I had to get a customer. I was on the phone trying to close deals, did proposals, did everything, super fast turnaround to get a customer, to get the income, pre-sale, convince them that they had to pay early. And then so I could pay my rent on Monday, because it didn't come on Friday. So, damn it, the banks were too slow. I couldn't get the money. Anyway, yeah. So again, that stress, either you can cope with it and you try to deal with it, you try and find a way out, or it's just not for you. And then you realize, this is not for me. I don't want to do this. This is too stressful. I don't want these sleepless nights. So I would prefer something more stable, and that's okay too, right? There are different folks for different strokes. Not everybody will do the startup thing.
I'm sure that a lot of people that are listening that may be young and hoping to be an entrepreneur and start their own businesses will really appreciate all that you just said. So we're going to wrap up in a minute.
Don't do it alone. Definitely don't do a
Don't
startup
do it alone.
Don't do it alone.
Don't do it alone.
It's too hard today. You need sounding boards. You need somebody to work with. It is scary. And having somebody that you can do it with just helps that leap of faith.
So last thing I want to wrap up on here is being an entrepreneur. There's a lot of risks. There's a lot of difficulties. There's a lot of failures. But being an entrepreneur in a brand new industry, brand new technology is pretty much as high risk as you can get. And I don't know, obviously, but I'm sure there have been people along the way in more traditional industries who say, well, crypto, oof, you're stepping into a realm that you might not make it out alive. So what keeps you motivated to keep going in this industry, especially when we have so many calamitous events over the past year? What drives you to say crypto is it? I'm here to stay, because you started multiple businesses in crypto. What motivates you to continue?
The belief, right? Building a new system. I just feel the world needs a new system. I have 4 kids. I want my kids to experience a new world, a transparent world that is equal and provides access for everybody and creates hope and opportunity for them, right? I mean, that's the sort of nice world, but I really believe in this industry. I really believe blockchain, cryptocurrencies is the way forward. Just look at today, the FX, if the fiat world, we're no different to the fiat world. We're just building it in a much more transparent and new parallel system. And it's okay to have parallel systems. You still have Barnes and Noble bookshops in New York. You still have Amazon, right? So you still have Whole Foods. You still have Safeway. I mean, you still have Amazon, right? So you have the online and you have the physical world. So there's no problem with having multiple universes and different worlds out there. And I believe cryptocurrency, I look at the FX industry, right? The foreign exchange industry that has $7.5 trillion in transactions every single day.
Yeah.
Between the US dollar and the British pound and the euro and the yen and the dinar and the peso and I mean, man, oh my God, all these different currencies that are being traded, totally unregulated. But people are engaged in that industry. There are huge traders that all they're doing is moving FX rates and managing FX rates.
And that's not even including the black market, which is massive as well.
Yeah. I don't even know.
We don't even know that's the numbers on that. It could be way bigger. We don't know.
But you have all of these FX rates and FX coins out there, all these different coins that are backed by different institutions that people trust, people don't trust. Right? I mean, I trust the US dollar, but do I trust the Zaire dollar? I don't know. Or the Zimbabwe dollar? I don't know, man. You can pay me in Zimbabwe dollar, but I get 100 million trillion. Or what's the
yeah. They have $1 billion bill, I think.
Yeah. So do I want to get paid in that? But that nobody calls that a scam, right? Because it's run by some company or some individual that's a part of the UN, and it's like, oh, it's okay. He's doing it okay. He's doing it his way. And so I think crypto is exactly the same thing. CoinGecko is our trading place where we find the rates. We go to Uniswap to swap it in and out, or to Binance and go and swap it in and out, right? And those becomes the FX, and we have our different currencies. So to me, this is a whole new economy that's growing. And I want to be a part of that growth. I got into the mobile industry. I was in the growth in China. I was in the growth in mobile industry. And I see the growth in, crypto as a huge generational, century change, right? Transformation that this is going to be bringing about.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, founder and CEO of Laguna Labs, Truflation, Nuon Finance, and so much more. Stefan, thank you so, so much for joining me today. I'll be linking his Twitter and the links to Truflation dashboard and Nuon Finance in the description below. Thank you so much, Stefan.
Thank you, Zad. Super nice. And thank you for your time, and everybody who was listening to this for, I don't know how long we were talking for, but hope you enjoyed it. And thank you for your time. Time is the most precious asset that we all have.